Sidis on the Parsha's Devarim. Today we'll be looking at a piece from the More of a Shamesh. So in this week's Parsha, we start the new book of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim, and essentially it takes place over the course of about 40 days, and it is essentially Moshe reviewing the Torah that they had learnt from the other 4 books, and there's also some new stuff added on, but it's essentially Moshe Rabbeinu is about to pass away, so he wants to strengthen the people in their observance of mitzvahs. Now, let's read the first pasuk, which says, "These are the words that Moshe addressed to all of Israel across the Jordan, in the wilderness, on the Arava plain facing Suf, between Paran, Tophel, Lavan, Chaseres, V'di, Zohav." Now, if you just read that verse, it's just essentially setting the stage of where the location that Moshe was doing his final address in. But Rashi, quoting some of the Midrashim, tells us that this verse is a little bit deeper than it looks. So I have Rashi on the right side of the page, and in English it says, "These are the words." Because these are words of reproof, and he is enumerating here all the places where they provoked God to anger. Therefore he suppresses all mention of the matters in which they sinned and refers to them only by mere allusion, contained in the names of the places out of regard for Israel. So essentially what Rashi is saying is that this verse is not as innocuous as it looks. It's not just naming locations to set the stage of where they are. It says that these locations were specified out as hints to the Jewish people, to things that they did in those locations, right? It would kind of be like, I don't know, if you choose a place, like let's say one time you did something bad in the city of Nashville, and then your friend says, well, I was in Nashville last week, so to speak. So meaning like, I'm over-exaggerating, but you kind of understand that sometimes by saying a word like the name of a location, it reminds people of something they did in that location that might have not been so good. So that's what Rashi says is going on in this verse, that Moshe is reminding them of sins that they committed in these places. So the More of a Shamesh has 2 very interesting questions. Question number 1 is, why did he do it in such a veiled way? Why didn't he just come out and say right away, hey, you remember that thing you guys did in the midbar? Like, blah, 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 blah. Like, enunciate the whole thing that they did in the midbar. Why does he just mention the word midbar, for example? And then just assume that Klal Yisrael knows what he's talking about and that they got the message from that. And then the second question is that any time we have the words in Hebrew, Ele ha-Devarim, Rashi in another place says that gets rid of everything that was said before. So, for example, there's a verse in another parsha that says, Ele toldos Yaakov, and then it goes on and mentions Yosef. So Rashi over there says that what came before the words Ele Tolos Yaakov, this is the genealogy of Yaakov, it was talking about his son Esav's progeny, all the people that came from Esav. And then it says Ele Tolos Yaakov, and then it mentions Yosef's progeny. And Rashi says that anytime it says the words Ele HaDevarim, or just Ele in general, it means the thing that came beforehand is unimportant. And you should basically kind of disregard it and only focus on what's going forward. Yet, over here, it's not really clear if we use that type of meaning, what that would mean over here. This is like the start of a new book. You know what I'm saying? So what's going on over here? That's what the More of a Shamesh wants to understand. So to understand this, the More of a Shamesh says that, first of all, a Jew has to be very careful when he speaks bad about the Jewish people, or if he's going to speak bad about any particular Jew. And many times people have to do that when they have to give rebuke to another Jew. So you see, like, there's a mitzvah to give another Jew rebuke, but there's a mitzvah to do it in a way that's refined. And if you can allude to something and you know that that person will understand the allusion and get the message without you publicly in front of other people rebuking them, right? Then you should, and you actually are chayiv, you are obligated to rebuke the person in that type of way, in a way that's a little bit more concealed from the other people, so it's not done publicly. And in teaching, because I'm like a certified teacher, we actually tell teachers, do not go like this. Hey, Jimmy, you're a cheater. Or, hey, Jimmy, you're a thief. We don't do that. You don't want to label students like that. If you have something you need to say to the student like that, there's a way to do it with finesse, in a way that it doesn't have to be so public, yet you can still get your message across very sternly. And that is what you have to do when giving rebuke. In fact, Moshe Rabbeinu was punished for when the Jewish people complained about not having water, which they shouldn't have been complaining about because very simply God had always taken care of them up to that point. They had tons of years of documented evidence that everything was going to be okay, yet they complained. Moshe Rabbeinu referred to them as Hamorim, which means those who rebel, and Moshe Rabbeinu was punished for calling them rebels in a publicly open way. So Moshe Rabbeinu is not a dumb person. Moshe Rabbeinu is Rabbeinu. He's our teacher for a reason, because he teaches us that, okay, when you make a mistake once, you learn from that mistake. And that's exactly what happened in this week's Parsha. Moshe Rabbeinu had to rebuke the Jewish people. He was going to pass away, and he wanted them to continue to go on the right path, and he wanted them to fix the things that they had negative in them. But he didn't want to repeat the mistakes of rebuking them so publicly and calling them names. So what did he do? He mentioned the names of places where they had sinned before, and he knew that just by doing that, by mentioning those places, they would understand what he was alluding to, and that would be enough of a rebuke right there. And then to answer our first question, what is the word Elad? Our second question, Elad Devarim Asher Diber, what is the Elah coming to cancel out? According to the Moreh V'Shamash, it's coming to cancel out all the other times that Moshe Rabbeinu had given rebuke in the non-proper way. So this right here, this verse is one of the most important verses in the Torah because it's a verse that shows that Moshe Rabbeinu attained shleimus, that he was finally able to do the mitzvah of rebuke in the proper way. So remember, we call him Moshe Rabbeinu. So let us all this Shabbos learn from his example. And when we do things, even things like rebuke, and we have to do them properly and clearly, but we can also be methodical about it. We can do it in a way that preserves that person's dignity, just like what Moshe did for Klal Yisrael over here. All right, have a great Shabbos.